There's a number of debates that are continuously brought up in Yakuza fan discourse, even when we're in the waiting period between major releases. The debate on the best Yakuza combat system is one such example, especially now that the mainline entries have shifted exclusively towards turn-based gameplay. So, with the recent rise in criticism towards Like a Dragon Gaiden's combat, and the fact that I've gone back to my character action roots while dealing with some classic Yakuza burnout, I found myself pondering this very same question. And in doing so, I came to the super original conclusion that there is no correct answer. I'm not saying this to try and be diplomatic or say that every game has its charm. I mean that the criteria to measure a combat system's values are never universally defined in the first place. A casual player could consider games with the biggest number of playable characters or featured styles to be the peak of the franchise. So games like Yakuza 5, 0, OG Ishin, and Lost Judgment will likely be the most frequent contenders for that position. On the other hand, there are players who will focus less on the sheer quantity of moves and more on their genuine utility in combat, preferring to see one character that is mechanically explored to the max over seeing several characters with comparably less depth to their respective movesets. And then of course, there are completely separate categories for individuals trying to do no damage runs, and ones trying to do classic stylish gameplay inspired by Goliaths like DMC and Bayonetta. The values that a given group will elevate above others could completely be at odds with what the remainder of the community values. And admittedly, most of what I've said thus far feels like just common sense, so why bring it up in the first place? Well, lately, there's been this idea that RGG has been stagnating in their beat-em-up gameplay development, with Ishin Kiwami and Gaiden supposedly being subpar when compared to Lost Judgment specifically. While there is an argument to be made there, particularly with Ishin Kiwami, this has retroactively led to a vocal portion of the community seeing Lost Judgment as this untouchable entity bereft of any flaws. And let me be the guy to say that, no, Lost Judgment isn't even close to being perfect. I could go on about how Boxer is a mere proof of concept that doesn't justify its existence, how Snake is wasted on Yagami when Tiger and the improved Crane cover more than enough ground on their own, or how having 4 combat styles you can only cycle through via a single button defeats the whole purpose of having a genuinely stylish, non-linear combat approach in a game. But the point of this detour isn't to say that Lost Judgment's combat is supposedly bad, because it's not. It's phenomenal, and it should be seen as a grand accomplishment by RGG, but it's far from truly being perfect, and critiquing the other games for not playing like this one does isn't going to improve the franchise moving forward. Which begs the question, how do we know whether or not the games are improving if we don't compare them to the best of the franchise? Well, to put it simply, we need to remember that each Yakuza game has its own unique goals that it aims to fulfill. The fact that a multi-style setup worked for Lost Judgment or Yakuza 0 and resulted in near universal acclaim doesn't mean that it would be a perfect fit for every single game in the franchise. And even if it was, you'd eventually reach a point where adding countless new fighting styles with each new game would gradually result in more and more moves being carried over from the older games, thus damaging the uniqueness of the newer combat systems. You'll notice how the focus of the video has suddenly shifted from talking about quote-unquote the best combat system to discussing how or if the series could even improve on the best system that was crafted thus far. And this is the natural culmination of that particular discourse, because once everyone says their piece on the system that they love the most, regardless of your personal opinion, you will be caught in a dilemma. What if RGG had already peaked? Does this mean we'll need to retroactively Kiwamify every past game until they play like 0 or Lost Judgment? Obviously no. What is more important is to put personal preferences aside for the time, and again, look at a given combat system within the context of the game it is bound to. Take for example Yakuza 5. While it may have issues with the frequency of enemy encounters, the movesets themselves are deliberately designed around the characters that use them for the encounters they partake in. And yet, if you compare said movesets to their predecessors in Yakuza 4, you'll notice that each of them has evolved, sometimes for the better and other times for the worse. But ultimately, it is thanks to these evolutions and changes that the combat systems have gradually improved over the years, regardless of how long it may have taken to reach a universally accepted peak of sorts. There may come a day when someone documents all of the frame data, damage output, and hit properties for every single move in every single Yakuza game in an attempt to see which combat system is truly the best. But even then, this concrete data wouldn't make that combat system perfect, nor would it dissuade fans from preferring one system over another. While it may be interesting to ponder what an older game could look like if it featured more modern design philosophies, I can wholeheartedly say that every single game in this franchise had the exact combat system that it needed for it to achieve its inherent goals, and changing them would contradict the role and value a given game had in reaching the point where we currently are. There was a point in time where a game like Yakuza 2 was seen as the genuine peak of RGG's combat philosophy. But if the series kept playing it safe and simply copied it, we never would have gotten the multiple protagonists of Yakuza 4. If games like Ishin and Yakuza 0 didn't try offering multiple fighting styles to a singular character, we would have wound up with more and more protagonists being thrown in instead, in a desire for the games to keep feeling bigger and bigger. I believe that there is no such thing as the best Yakuza combat system, at least not at this point in time. But if we want to collectively reach a point where such a system may come to be, we need to stop lifting certain games up on a pedestal and analyze each game for what it is and what it needs to be. Which ultimately brings us to Like a Dragon Gaiden. As if my thoughts on Lost Judgment haven't resulted in enough vitriol, I'll go out of my way to state another divisive take. Gaiden was a necessary improvement on the previous combat systems. I've seen journalists call this game disappointing and a step back because it only had 2 fighting styles, putting aside the fact that 2 styles were all that this game really needed, because frankly, if we added another one, it would just run the risk of creating a system with merely superficial depth. For a system with multiple styles to work, the styles themselves need to be deliberately designed to benefit one another, because if you have one style that can effectively do everything, it will make the rest of the toolkit feel like bloat, which is something that's been brought up as a big issue with OG Judgment, and to a lesser extent, Yakuza Kiwami. Journalists aside, there were some valid points being raised about the downsides of Gaiden's combat, like the process of acquiring moves requiring dual currencies, or how the heat actions are a tertiary tool now that EX heat is the preferred climax to your heat gauge filling up. And while the first issue could easily be alleviated if RGG finally made a New Game Plus patch for the game, the second one actually feels like RGG is looking to bring this franchise's combat to levels we never would have anticipated before. Bear with me, I swear that this is relevant. There's a particular SEGA IP that is deservedly listed as one of the best character action games to date, that being a personal favorite of mine, Bayonetta. The focal point of character action games is the stylish combat, and in trying to improve it from game to game, certain game mechanics need to be omitted or transformed. To explain this example in Yakuza terms, imagine that the glowing orbs beneath the health gauge functioned like a heat gauge of sorts. Once you fill it up, you can use it to execute something called a torture attack, or in the case of Yakuza terminology, something akin to our beloved heat actions. However, the way this gauge functioned has drastically changed in the second game, where it now also allowed you to go into Umbran Climax, which you might as well envision as extreme heat mode. This change received significant praise with time, even though many style players, myself included, were initially apprehensive towards the game's changes. And the way this system functioned had once again changed in Bayonetta 3, but that's a story for another time. Going back to Gaiden, while it may feel like RGG is taking a step back from what they'd previously achieved, the end result is actually a step forward, one which shows their desire to keep building and keep improving their systems for the future. Creating a complex style like Agent, increasing the number of enemies in an encounter, or shortening the airtime of airborne enemies to reduce juggle spamming, All of these are decisions that can and will be divisive in the community. Personally, I adore them. Other people genuinely despise them, and that's alright. At some point in time, this series will stop receiving new entries, as unfortunate as this sounds, and when that time comes, we'll look back on every experiment RGG conducted and be able to appreciate how they didn't just play it safe. While many fans may already be content with what has been achieved, you never really know what the future holds, especially for a team as ambitious as this one. All that we can really do is join them for the ride, in their pursuit of what may truly lead to the best Yakuza combat system. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the more open-ended, roundtable-esque nature of the video, as I wanted to try doing a short-scale video for a change. Now, in theory, I could have done a very detailed overview of everything Gaiden's combat had to offer, especially since I'm currently re-platinuming the DMC HD collection, meaning that the mindset would indeed be adequate, but the video you're currently watching felt the right one to release for the time. So I hope you found some value in my condensed thoughts on this particular debate. Let me know what your favorite combat system is down in the comments, or if there are any other topics you'd like to see discussed on the channel. Either way, I look forward to seeing you again in the future. So, until next time, take care of yourselves and have a great day. Cheers!